All right, let's take a look at some ways that you can make sure your employees aren't setting you up for a business paralyzing ransomware nightmare. And we're gonna go through some steps that you can take to make sure hackers aren't getting to your data. First, you're probably wondering, who's Bruce McCulley and what does he know about protecting data? Well, I spent 20 years building an incident response team, and what we would do is we would come into hospitals and we would recover them from ransomware. And as you can probably imagine, when it comes to going in and taking care of a hospital, they wouldn't contact you when just one machine was hit with ransomware. They would contact you when every single device was being held for ransom and their IT teams were completely overwhelmed. And what I started to see is that there were some commonalities inside some of these attacks and realized that all businesses were at risk. I decided to do something about it and I did something crazy. I sold my successful incident response company and I started on this new mission to help protect 1 million people. And I'm here to tell you, if you put together the best security tools in the world, you might feel completely safe, but that's exactly what hackers want you to think. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, they can still get in and get to all of the devices in your environment. So why does that happen? Well, it's simple. There are a couple of things that are working against you. The first one is, well, you have employees and they make mistakes. The next one is you don't necessarily know about all your cybersecurity risks. And then finally, what we find is that a lot of folks have tools that are just, frankly, misconfigured. So let's talk about those employees and how they're opening the door to hackers. What I want you to think about is I want you to think about when you go and you actually open your front door, like your physical front door. If you were to go out, open your physical front door and invite a criminal into your house, gosh, they could do a lot of damage, right? Well, the same goes for your networks. And if you think about it, that's what phishing is it's a criminal trying to get an employee to open the front door and bring them into the network. And guess what? There's a whole bunch of new methods out there that attackers are using. And I just want to share a couple of them with you real quick. The first one that I want to bring up is something called callback phishing. Basically, you get an email that looks like this one. It has an attachment in it, but the attachment, it's not malicious. Instead, the email goes through and it says, hey, your subscription is going to be activated and paid in the next 24 hours using the bank account details that you provided. And if you have any questions or concerns, contact customer support. Their number's on the attached invoice. When you open that invoice, what you find is a phone number there, and many people end up calling that number. Then you're going to talk to a professional who's going to convince you to allow them onto your computer. Once they get onto your computer, then they're able to go and start pulling your data off of your network. The other thing that we're seeing is attackers are getting past multi-factor authentication. How does that work? We've all gotten this notification asking us whether or not we wanted to accept or deny access to somebody when we're logging into our accounts. Imagine instead of getting one of them, you got 200 of them. And they just kept coming and coming. And then you get a phone call from the company that's providing you this multi-factor authentication. Think your bank or a healthcare provider. And they tell you, gosh, we're having a problem with our authentication system. Do me a huge favor, approve one of those messages that are popping up so that we can go in and fix it. They might even say, do me a favor, give me the code so that this system stops texting you. And basically what they do is they then take that code and then they access your account. Once they're in, then they can go through and they can steal your data, possibly lock all of your data so you can't get access to it, and even use your information to phish others, like other people in your organization. You know, the most successful phishing comes from somebody you know. Well, what can you do about this? First, talk to your team. Give them a heads up. Share these new attacks with them so they know what's coming. And consider having recurring training, because if you're only doing training once a year or once a quarter, you're getting into a situation where the attackers are actually getting in front of you. They're always coming up with new ways in, and you want to make sure that you're training your team on the new ways to protect themselves. All right, we talked about how employees open the door for hackers. Let's dig into the risks in your own environment. Now, before we jump into this, I just want to ask you a quick question. Do you really want to invest in cybersecurity? And the answer is probably not. Because it's really hard to see a return on investment in cybersecurity. The only reason that people invest in security is to get protections from risk. And the problem here is cybersecurity risk is hard to comprehend. It's hard to see. In fact, you can't see a hacker. So it makes it very, very difficult to see the type of risk they create. And what do people do with risk? Well, there's a couple of things that you can do. The first one is you can avoid it, you can reduce it, you can accept it, and you can transfer it. Speaking of transferring it, I want to just bring up a quick example. Do you purchase a homeowner's insurance policy? I bet you do. Because if you think about it, you know all of the different risks that could happen to your house. And the next question is, would you buy homeowner's insurance if you knew that nothing bad would happen to your house in the next 12 months? Like, would you go through and renew that policy? No way. So why do people buy homeowner's insurance? Because you understand the risks. And how do you understand these risks? Well, you see these things happen to people's houses all the time on the news. But when we look at ransomware, we see something completely different. Look at this article for a minute. Ransomware attacks top 1.2 million per month. And this other one, these are the biggest corporate hacks of 2021. 50 million, 70 million, 30 million. These are all big news. And they're all big companies, and ultimately, they're all big numbers. And I bet you think to yourself, you know what? If I had a ransom for $1 million, I'd just go out of business. Or you might think to yourself, you know what? They're not bothering with small businesses like mine. And these different issues remind me of a situation our security team helped out with just a couple of months ago. A 2-person law firm who thought they were too small to be hacked, they downloaded a QuickBooks update. And it happened to be that this QuickBooks update was fake. And both of their computers ended up getting ransomed. So they locked down all of the data on both of their computers, and the hackers were able to destroy their backups. Then the hackers asked for the exact amount of money that these attorneys had in their bank account. Imagine being asked for a ransom that was the exact amount of cash you had on hand. What would you do? Well, remember, hackers can actually see your system. In fact, they're usually in it for a few days, weeks, or months before they pull the trigger. So this law firm had to pay the ransom. And this is all because they didn't have an advanced firewall properly configured. Guys, all businesses are at risk. It doesn't matter how big or small, or whether you're in the cloud, all businesses are at risk. And here's what you can do. Perform a risk assessment. This is not something you can delegate to your IT people. This is something that you, as the leader and owner of the business, are going to need to be involved with. Because ultimately what you're doing is you're figuring out what your risk profile looks like. You're going to go through and you're going to identify critical data assets that are required to keep your business running. Then you're going to consider the threats that put those assets at risk, and you're going to get a list of the controls that are in place to protect those assets. All right, everyone, we spent some time talking about how employees open the door to hackers. Then we talked about how most folks don't understand what's at risk. Now let's talk a little bit about the tools that you have in place. Do you think the hospitals we recovered were investing in cybersecurity? Do you think that they had up-to-date antivirus? Do you think they thought they were doing all of the right things? Absolutely. They were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases to make sure that they didn't have a situation like the one that we had to go clean up. They're basically throwing their money down a big cybersecurity toilet. And when you're going through and spending thousands of dollars on cybersecurity, and you have an event where an attacker gets in and gets to every single device in your environment, or they come through and they suck up all of your data and they're able to get that data out of the network and then blackmail you with that data, the question becomes, how does this happen? And the bottom line is that a lot of organizations are expecting their IT teams to go through and proofread their own work. They're expecting them to go through and look at the controls that they put in place. And the problem with that is when you go and you look at the security controls that you yourself put in place, you're not aware of all of the pieces around the outside that might allow an attacker through. And I know you're probably thinking to yourself, I have somebody that's responsible for our security, but are you absolutely sure that you're secure? If you can't answer yes, then I want you to consider getting a free third-party cybersecurity assessment. And basically what we'll do is we'll figure out whether your security solution would detect or stop an attack. We'll go through, we'll analyze your security, we'll show you how your tools respond, and we'll give you steps that you can take to protect yourself and your data. And if you Google how much does a pen test cost, they run between $10,000 and $30,000. And this is much more than a pen test. We're going through and helping you identify those critical data assets that we talked about earlier. We're helping you analyze the risk. We're going through and providing an analysis both internally and externally of your security systems. We're identifying information that could be used to steal someone's identity. And we're going through and we're evaluating your Microsoft Office security settings. All these things fulfill these new cyber insurance requirements around having a third party do this type of analysis. You're probably wondering, what's the catch? Guys, there is no catch. We're on a mission to help protect 1 million people. And as part of that mission, we're going through and we're providing these free third-party security assessments. If you're interested in doing this, at the bottom of the screen is a URL. Go to it and sign up immediately so that we can go through and get started, because this offer isn't going to be around for long.